The late afternoon sun, a molten orb beginning its slow descent below the horizon, cast long, dancing shadows across the manicured lawn of the Henderson residence. Inside, amidst the comforting chaos of a home preparing for a momentous occasion, 8-year-old Liam Henderson felt a knot of unease tighten in his small stomach. It was a feeling as unwelcome and persistent as a buzzing fly on a summer afternoon, a stark contrast to the buoyant anticipation that seemed to radiate from every other corner of the house. Tomorrow was the day. Tomorrow, his dad, Robert, a kind-eyed man with a perpetually optimistic smile, was marrying Emily Carter. To the casual observer, it was a fairy tale come true. Robert, a widower for 3 years since the sudden and heartbreaking loss of Liam's mother, Sarah, had found love again. Emily was beautiful, with a warm smile that could melt the iciest demeanor, and she seemed genuinely devoted to Robert. Everyone said so. Grandma Henderson, usually the most discerning of critics, adored her. Even his best friend, Mikey, who was more interested in video games than romance, had grudgingly admitted that Emily was pretty cool. But Liam saw something else. It wasn't anything concrete, nothing he could quite put his finger on, but it was there, lurking beneath the surface of Emily's charming facade like a shadow in a sunlit room. It was in the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes when Robert wasn't looking, the almost imperceptible flicker of impatience that crossed her features when Liam asked too many questions, or the way she seemed to hold herself aloof, a carefully constructed island, whenever Robert was out of the room. Liam was a perceptive child, blessed, or perhaps burdened, with an acute sense of observation. Even at his young age, he possessed an unwavering moral compass, a deep-seated belief in right and wrong that had been nurtured by his parents. He was fiercely loyal to those he loved, a small but determined protector of his inner circle, which primarily consisted of his dad and the cherished memories of his mom. The thought of anything, or anyone, causing them harm, even emotional harm, stirred a protective instinct within him that belied his tender years. He sat now on the plush, cream-colored sofa in the living room, a half-finished Lego Millennium Falcon resting on the coffee table before him. The intricate pieces, usually a source of intense focus and satisfaction, lay scattered, forgotten. His gaze was fixed on the framed photograph on the mantelpiece, a picture of his mom and dad on their wedding day, their faces radiant with joy. A pang of longing, sharp and familiar, pierced through him. He missed his mom terribly, the comforting scent of her lavender perfume, the gentle way she would ruffle his hair, the stories she would read to him before bedtime, her voice a soothing melody in the quiet of the evening. Emily had tried to fill that void, he knew. She had bought him new toys, taken him to the movies, and even attempted to learn the rules of his complicated board games. But it felt different. Forced. Like she was following a script rather than acting from the heart. There was a coolness in her interactions with him, a subtle distance that made him feel like an outsider in his own home. He remembered a few weeks ago, when he had accidentally spilled juice on the new rug Emily had picked out for the dining room. Robert had rushed in, concern etched on his face, ready to offer comfort. But before Robert could say a word, Liam had seen a flash of pure, unadulterated anger in Emily's eyes, quickly masked by a sigh of exaggerated exasperation. "Oh, Liam," she had said, her voice laced with a saccharine sweetness that sounded utterly false to his ears. "You have to be more careful, sweetie. This rug was very expensive." Robert, ever the peacemaker, had gently steered Emily away, whispering something about accidents happening, but the image of that fleeting anger, that unguarded glimpse into Emily's true feelings, had stuck with Liam. It was like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit, a discordant note in an otherwise harmonious melody. The house was a flurry of activity. Aunt Carol and Uncle Jim had arrived from out of state, their boisterous laughter echoing through the hallways. Mrs. Davison, their friendly neighbor who had practically become an honorary grandmother since Sarah's passing, was in the kitchen, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she helped prepare a mountain of hors d'oeuvres. The air was thick with the aroma of roasting chicken and freshly baked cookies. Robert, his face beaming, kept popping in to check on Liam, ruffling his hair and asking if he was excited for tomorrow. Liam would nod and offer a weak smile, the knot in his stomach refusing to loosen. He wanted to be happy for his dad, he truly did. Robert deserved happiness. But the thought of Emily becoming a permanent fixture in their lives filled him with an inexplicable dread. Later that evening, after a chaotic but cheerful dinner, Liam found himself unable to sleep. The unfamiliar sounds of his aunt and uncle settling into the guest room, the hushed whispers from his dad's bedroom, the general air of excitement, it all conspired to keep his mind racing. He slipped out of bed and padded silently down the hallway, drawn by a sliver of light emanating from his dad's study. The door was slightly ajar, and he could hear Emily's voice, low and urgent, on the other side. Curiosity, and a growing sense of unease, propelled him closer. He pressed his ear against the cool wood of the door, his heart pounding in his chest. "Yes, the date is set for tomorrow," Emily was saying, her tone sharp and devoid of the sweetness she usually employed. "Everything is in place, right? The paperwork, you made sure everything was finalized?" There was a muffled response from the other end of the line. "Good," Emily continued, a hint of steel entering her voice. "Because this has to go smoothly. I've waited long enough for this." Liam frowned, his brow furrowed in confusion. Waited long enough for what? What paperwork? He strained his ears, trying to catch every word. "Don't worry about the boy," Emily said dismissively. "He's just a kid. He'll get over it. Once we're married, he'll have to accept things." A cold wave washed over Liam. The boy. She was talking about him. And her tone, it was cold, almost contemptuous. This wasn't the Emily who smiled at his dad and offered him extra cookies. This was a different Emily, a hidden Emily. The conversation continued, but Liam's mind was reeling. He couldn't quite grasp the full context, but there was something in Emily's voice, in her secretive tone, that sent a shiver of apprehension down his spine. It felt wrong. Dangerously wrong. He quietly retreated to his room, his earlier unease now solidified into a tangible fear. He lay in bed, staring up at the glow-in-the-dark stars he had stuck on his ceiling, his mind a whirlwind of confusing thoughts and unsettling feelings. He thought of his mom, her warm embrace, her unwavering love. Would she have liked Emily? Something deep inside him screamed no. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a picture-perfect day for a wedding. But inside the Henderson household, beneath the veneer of joyous anticipation, a storm was brewing in the heart of an 8-year-old boy. As the hours ticked by, leading inexorably towards the afternoon ceremony, Liam's anxiety grew. He watched Emily as she moved through the house, her smile radiant as she greeted arriving guests, her laughter light and airy. But behind that carefully constructed facade, he still saw glimpses of the coldness he had witnessed the night before. He tried to talk to his dad, to voice his unease, but every time he tried to broach the subject, Robert would smile reassuringly and say, "Don't worry, buddy. Everything's going to be wonderful. You'll see." Robert was so happy, so completely smitten with Emily, that he seemed incapable of seeing anything amiss. As they got ready for the wedding, Liam felt a growing sense of desperation. He knew, with a certainty that belied his age, that something was wrong. Terribly wrong. He just didn't know what it was, or how to stop it. He was dressed in a crisp, new suit that felt stiff and uncomfortable. As Robert helped him knot his tie, Liam looked up at his dad's happy face, the lines of worry that had etched themselves around his eyes in the years since his mom's death finally smoothed away. He couldn't bear the thought of that happiness being shattered. The limousine arrived, sleek and black, a symbol of the joyous occasion. As they drove to the church, Liam sat silently in the back seat, his small hands clenched in his lap, his mind racing. He had to do something. He had to protect his dad. But what could an 8-year-old boy do against the seemingly perfect Emily? The church was beautiful, adorned with flowers, the air thick with the scent of roses and lilies. Guests were already seated in the pews, their faces expectant. As Liam walked down the aisle with his dad, he saw Grandma Henderson beaming at them, Aunt Carol dabbing her eyes with a tissue, Uncle Jim giving Robert a thumbs up. Everyone was so happy. But Liam's gaze was fixed on Emily, standing at the altar, radiant in a white lace gown. As their eyes met for a fleeting moment, he saw a flicker of something in her expression, not love, not joy, but something cold and calculating. It was the final confirmation of his fears. He knew, in that moment, what he had to do. It was a decision born not of childish impetuousness, but of a deep and unwavering love for his father and a fierce commitment to truth and justice. It was a decision that would change everything. As the pastor began to speak the solemn words of the marriage ceremony, Liam took a deep breath, his small chest heaving. He looked at his dad, at the hopeful anticipation in his eyes, and then back at Emily, her face a mask of serene expectation. He couldn't let it happen. He wouldn't. With a suddenness that startled everyone, Liam pulled his hand away from his father's. He took a step forward, his small voice trembling but clear, cutting through the hushed reverence of the church. Wait. The single word hung in the air, a discordant note in the otherwise harmonious symphony of the wedding ceremony. All eyes turned to the small boy standing in the aisle, his face pale but his gaze resolute. Robert looked down at his son, his brow furrowed in confusion and concern. Liam. What is it, buddy? Emily's smile faltered, a flicker of annoyance crossing her features before she quickly masked it with a look of gentle concern. Is everything all right, dear? She asked, her voice laced with a sweetness that now sounded utterly hollow to Liam. But Liam wasn't looking at Emily. His gaze was fixed on his father, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. He had to do this. He had to tell the truth, no matter the consequences. He took another step forward, his small voice gaining strength. Dad, he said, his voice trembling slightly but carrying through the stunned silence of the church. You can't marry her. She's not who you think she is. She's hiding something bad. The air in the church seemed to thicken, the joyous atmosphere replaced by a palpable tension. A collective gasp rippled through the guests. Grandma Henderson's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Aunt Carol stopped dabbing her eyes, her tissue forgotten in her lap. Uncle Jim's thumbs up faltered, his expression turning serious. Robert's face was a mask of confusion and disbelief. Liam, what are you talking about? What's wrong? He knelt down beside his son, his voice filled with concern. It's okay, buddy. Just tell me what's the matter. Emily stood frozen at the altar, her radiant smile now completely gone, replaced by a look of dawning alarm. Her eyes darted around the church, assessing the reactions of the guests. Liam looked into his father's kind eyes, his heart aching at the thought of the pain he was about to inflict. But he knew he had no choice. The truth had to be told. Dad, he said, his voice gaining strength and conviction. Emily, she's not a good person. I heard her talking on the phone. She's planning something about the insurance money. And I saw pictures of her with another man. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The stunned silence of the church was broken only by a few nervous coughs and the rustling of clothes as guests shifted in their seats, their faces a mixture of shock, disbelief, and morbid curiosity. Robert stared at his son, his eyes searching Liam's face for any sign of childish mischief or misunderstanding. But what he saw was genuine fear and unwavering conviction. A seed of doubt, tiny but persistent, began to sprout in his mind. Emily finally found her voice, her tone a carefully constructed blend of hurt and indignation. Robert, darling, what is he saying? This is ridiculous. What pictures? What insurance money? She took a step towards them, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. Liam, sweetie, you must have misunderstood something. But Liam stood his ground, his small frame radiating an unexpected strength. He looked directly at Emily, his 8-year-old eyes holding a wisdom beyond his years. No, I didn't misunderstand. I heard you. You said you'd waited long enough. You talked about the paperwork. And I saw the pictures in your drawer. Pictures of you kissing another man. The color drained from Emily's face. The carefully constructed facade of sweetness and innocence crumbled, revealing a glimpse of the cold, calculating woman Liam had sensed all along. The pastor stood awkwardly at the altar, unsure of what to do. The wedding guests were a sea of stunned faces, their whispers and murmurs beginning to fill the stunned silence. The joyous occasion had been abruptly derailed, replaced by a scene of unexpected drama and shocking accusations. Robert looked from his son's earnest face to Emily's now pale and panicked expression. The seed of doubt in his mind began to take root, growing rapidly into a gnawing suspicion. He had to know the truth. He owed it to Liam. He owed it to himself. He owed it to the memory of Sarah. Emily, he said, his voice low and steady, his eyes searching hers. Is what Liam's saying true? Emily opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her eyes darted around the church again, desperately seeking an escape, a way out of this unfolding nightmare. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by Liam's small, ragged breaths. The joyous anticipation of the wedding day had been shattered, replaced by a shocking revelation that hung in the air like a dark cloud, casting a long shadow over what was supposed to be the happiest day of Robert's life. The weight of Robert's question hung heavy in the stunned silence. Emily's carefully constructed composure finally fractured. Her eyes, moments before shimmering with feigned innocence, now darted around the church with a trapped, desperate look. A muscle twitched in her jaw, and the color drained further from her face, leaving it ashen under the soft glow of the stained glass windows. Robert, she began, her voice trembling slightly, a stark contrast to the confident tone she had used just moments before. Liam, he's just a child. He doesn't understand. Understand what, Emily? Robert interrupted, his voice firm, a newfound steel hardening his gaze. He looked from his son, whose small hand now clutched his own, to the woman he was moments away from marrying. The image of her radiant smile at the altar, the vows they were about to exchange, it all seemed to blur and distort, replaced by the unsettling picture Liam had painted. He's probably just confused, Emily stammered, her eyes pleading with Robert. Kids have wild imaginations, you know. He must have overheard something and gotten the wrong idea. She attempted a weak, nervous laugh, but it fell flat in the tense atmosphere. But Robert wasn't looking at her anymore. His gaze was fixed on Liam, on the unwavering sincerity in his son's young eyes. He knew Liam. He knew his son's inherent honesty, his strong sense of right and wrong. Liam wasn't a child prone to fabrication, especially not something this serious, this dramatic. Liam, Robert said softly, kneeling down to look his son directly in the eye. Tell me everything you heard. Everything you saw. Liam took a deep breath, the small tremor in his voice gradually fading as he recounted the overheard phone conversation, the hushed tones, the mention of insurance money and a getaway. He spoke of the coldness in Emily's eyes when Robert wasn't around, the subtle dismissiveness in her voice when she spoke to him. And then, his voice dropping slightly but still clear enough for everyone to hear, he described finding the photographs. They were in a box in her closet, he explained, his small hand gesturing vaguely. Pictures of her, kissing a man who wasn't you, Dad. They were smiling and holding hands. It didn't look like just friends. A wave of murmurs rippled through the stunned guests. Some exchanged shocked glances, others leaned forward, eager to absorb every detail of the unfolding drama. Grandma Henderson gasped softly, her hands still pressed to her mouth, her eyes now filled with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. Emily's carefully constructed world was crumbling around her. Her face was now a mask of panic, her eyes darting wildly as she tried to regain control of the situation. "This is insane," she exclaimed, her voice rising in pitch. "Robert, you can't possibly believe him. He's just a child. He doesn't know what he's talking about." She turned to the guests, her eyes pleading for understanding. "Please, you all know me. You know I would never do anything to hurt Robert." But her pleas rang hollow in the face of Liam's earnest testimony and the palpable shift in Robert's demeanor. The trust that had blossomed between Robert and Emily over the past year seemed to wither and die in the space of those few shocking minutes. Robert stood up, his gaze now fixed on Emily, his expression a mixture of hurt and a growing sense of betrayal. "Emily," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Is there another man?" Emily's eyes flickered towards the entrance of the church, a fleeting expression of longing or perhaps expectation crossing her face. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement, but Robert, his senses heightened by the shock of Liam's revelations, didn't miss it. Just then, as if summoned by Emily's silent plea, a man entered the church. He was tall and well-dressed, with a confident swagger in his step. He paused just inside the doorway, his eyes scanning the scene with a look of mild amusement that quickly turned to surprise as he took in the tense atmosphere and the tear-streaked face of the bride. "Jessica? What's going on?" the man asked, his voice carrying through the stunned silence. The use of the name Jessica, a name different from the Emily Carter they all knew, sent another wave of shock through the assembled guests. Robert's eyes narrowed, his gaze now fixed on the newcomer. Emily, or rather, Jessica, visibly paled. Her carefully constructed facade had completely shattered, revealing the raw panic beneath. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Liam, sensing his father's confusion and hurt, tightened his grip on Robert's hand. "That's him, Dad," he whispered, his voice filled with a quiet certainty. "That's the man in the pictures." Robert's gaze flickered from Jessica to the man in the doorway, and then back to his son. The pieces of the puzzle, the inconsistencies he had subconsciously registered but dismissed, the unease that had gnawed at Liam, they all clicked into place with a sickening finality. The betrayal cut deep, a sharp, agonizing pain that overshadowed the joy he had felt just moments before. Who is this, Jessica?" Robert asked, his voice barely above a whisper, the hope in his eyes slowly fading. Jessica's composure finally broke. Tears streamed down her face as she looked from Robert to the man in the doorway, her expression a mixture of fear and regret. "Robert. It's not what you think," she stammered, her voice choked with emotion. But her words lacked conviction, lost in the weight of Liam's accusations and the undeniable presence of the other man. The man in the doorway, realizing the gravity of the situation, stepped further into the church. "Robert," he said, his voice calm but firm. "My name is Tony. Jessica and we have a history." The word history hung in the air, loaded with unspoken implications. The wedding guests shifted uneasily, their whispers growing louder, a cacophony of speculation and shock filling the once reverent space. Grandma Henderson, her face pale and drawn, finally found her voice. "Robert, dear boy," she said, her voice trembling. "What is going on here?" Robert didn't answer. His gaze was still fixed on Jessica, his eyes searching hers for any glimmer of truth, any explanation that could possibly make sense of the chaos that had erupted. But all he saw was guilt and fear. The pastor, looking increasingly uncomfortable, cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take a moment to discuss this privately," he suggested, his voice barely audible above the murmuring of the guests. But Robert shook his head slowly, his gaze never leaving Jessica's. "No," he said, his voice gaining strength, a newfound resolve hardening his features. "We will discuss this here. Now. I want to know the truth. All of it?" He turned to Jessica, his eyes filled with a pain that mirrored the joy he had felt just moments before. "Jessica," he said, the use of her real name a stark acknowledgement of the deception. "Who is Tony? And what were you planning?" Tears continued to stream down Jessica's face as she finally confessed. Her words tumbled out in a rush, a jumbled mess of half-truths and desperate justifications. She admitted that she and Tony had been involved for a long time, that they had financial difficulties, and that the upcoming marriage to Robert, with his comfortable life and substantial insurance policy, had presented an opportunity they couldn't resist. The details of their plan unfolded like a dark and twisted plot from a cheap thriller. They had intended to marry, and then, at some point in the future, stage an accident that would leave Robert dead and Jessica the sole beneficiary of his life insurance. Tony would then conveniently reappear, and they would live happily ever after with the ill-gotten gains. The revelation sent a wave of revulsion through the church. Gasps of horror and disbelief echoed through the stunned silence as Jessica's shocking confession filled the air. Robert stood as if struck, his face pale and drawn, the pain of betrayal etched deep in his eyes. Liam, witnessing his father's devastation, squeezed his hand tighter. He may not have fully understood the intricacies of Jessica and Tony's plan, but he understood the hurt in his father's eyes, the shattering of his trust. And in that moment, his protective instincts surged, a fierce loyalty towards his father overriding his own fear and confusion. Tony, seeing that their carefully laid plans had imploded, attempted to make a hasty exit. He turned to flee, but several of Robert's friends and family members, their faces grim with anger, quickly blocked his path. He was effectively trapped, caught in the aftermath of Jessica's devastating confession. Robert, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and heartbreak, called 911 on his cell phone, his words clipped and precise as he reported the attempted fraud and conspiracy. The joyous occasion had been replaced by the stark reality of betrayal and the impending arrival of the police. Jessica, her face buried in her hands, sobbed uncontrollably, her dreams of a comfortable future dissolving into a nightmare of her own making. The wedding dress, once a symbol of hope and new beginnings, now felt like a costume in a tragic and humiliating play. The wedding guests, initially stunned into silence, began to stir, their whispers and murmurs growing louder as they processed the shocking turn of events. Some offered Robert words of comfort, others glared at Jessica and Tony with undisguised disgust. The festive atmosphere had completely evaporated, replaced by a heavy cloud of disbelief and dismay. As they waited for the police to arrive, Robert knelt down beside Liam, pulling his son into a tight embrace. "You were so brave, buddy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved me. You saved us." Liam clung to his father, the knot of fear in his stomach finally beginning to loosen, replaced by a sense of relief and the warmth of his father's love. He had done the right thing. He had protected his dad. The arrival of the police sirens shattered the tense silence, signaling the end of the wedding that never was and the beginning of a long and difficult journey of healing and recovery for Robert and Liam. The joyous day had turned into a dramatic spectacle, a stark reminder that appearances can be deceiving and that sometimes, the greatest acts of courage come from the most unexpected sources. The initial unease Liam had felt towards Jessica solidified into a tangible suspicion during the long, quiet hours when his dad was at work at Tech Solutions Inc. The cheerful facade Jessica presented to Robert seemed to evaporate the moment the front door closed behind him, replaced by a coolness that sent shivers down Liam's spine. The playful banter and forced smiles directed at him when Robert was present vanished, leaving behind a woman who seemed barely to tolerate his existence. He would often observe her from a distance, a small, watchful figure lurking in the periphery of her attention. While Robert was showering her with affection, praising her cooking or complimenting her new dress, Jessica would beam, her laughter echoing through the house. But the moment Robert's attention was diverted, or he stepped out of the room, that radiant smile would flicker and fade, replaced by a look of something akin to boredom or even irritation. Her eyes, which sparkled so brightly in Robert's presence, held a distant, almost calculating glint when she interacted with Liam. There were small things, subtle shifts in her demeanor that wouldn't register with an adult preoccupied with work and romance, but they stood out starkly to Liam's observant young mind. The way her voice would drop several octaves when she spoke on the phone in another room, the hurried way she would end conversations if he happened to enter, the almost imperceptible sigh of annoyance when he asked for help with his homework. One Tuesday afternoon, Liam was in the living room, attempting to assemble a particularly complex section of his Lego Star Destroyer. He was stuck, the instructions a confusing jumble of diagrams and arrows. Normally, he would ask his mom for help, her patient guidance always managing to untangle the most frustrating constructions. Now, he hesitated, a knot of apprehension tightening in his stomach. He knew Jessica wasn't particularly fond of his messy toys, as she called them. He glanced towards the kitchen, where Jessica was ostensibly preparing lunch. He could hear the clatter of dishes and the faint hum of the microwave. Taking a deep breath, he gathered his courage and walked to the doorway. "Jessica?" he asked tentatively. She turned, a forced smile gracing her lips. "Yes, Liam." "What is it?" Her tone was polite, but lacked any real warmth. I'm having trouble with this Lego set," he said, holding up the instruction booklet. "Could you maybe help me for a minute?" The smile on Jessica's face tightened ever so slightly. "Oh, honey, I'm right in the middle of something important," she said, gesturing vaguely towards the counter where a laptop was open, displaying a social media feed. "Why don't you try to figure it out yourself? You're a smart boy." Liam's shoulders slumped slightly. He knew she wasn't busy with anything truly pressing. He had seen her scrolling through her phone just moments before. The dismissal stung, a small but sharp prick of rejection. He mumbled a quiet okay and turned to leave, the instruction booklet feeling heavier than before. As he walked back to the living room, he couldn't shake the feeling that Jessica simply didn't like him. It wasn't just that she wasn't as warm and nurturing as his mom, it was something more. It was as if his presence was an inconvenience, a barrier between her and something else. It was a few days later, on a Thursday afternoon, that Liam witnessed the scene that truly ignited his suspicion. Robert had left for an out-of-town business trip that morning, a fact that seemed to visibly lighten Jessica's mood. She had spent the morning on the phone, her voice light and cheerful, a stark contrast to the clipped tones she often used when speaking with Robert. Liam was in his room, building a towering block structure, when he heard the insistent ring of Jessica's iPhone. He paid it little mind at first, but then he noticed her hushed tone as she answered. He crept quietly to his bedroom door, drawn by an instinct he couldn't quite explain. Jessica was in the master bedroom, the door slightly ajar. He could hear her voice, low and conspiratorial, as she spoke. "Yes, it's me," she whispered. "He just left this morning. Everything is on schedule." Liam leaned closer, his heart beginning to pound in his chest. Who was she talking to? And what was on schedule? "No, the kid is no problem," Jessica continued, her tone dismissive, echoing the words he had overheard during the late-night phone call. "He mostly keeps to himself. And Robert, well, you know Robert. He wouldn't suspect a thing." A short, almost cynical laugh followed. Liam's blood ran cold. Her words, the dismissive tone, the secretive nature of the call, it all painted a picture that was far from the loving fiancé he was supposed to believe in. "The big score is still on for the wedding, right?" Jessica continued, her voice dropping even lower. "Everything is finalized with the arrangements." There was a muffled response from the other end of the line, but Liam couldn't make out the words. "Good," Jessica replied, a note of satisfaction creeping into her voice. "And the easy money will be ours soon enough." Just a few more days. Liam's mind raced. Big score? Easy money? Arrangements? What were they talking about? A sense of dread washed over him, a feeling that something terrible was being planned, and his dad was completely unaware. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, punctuated by Jessica's hushed whispers and occasional low laughter. Liam strained his ears, trying to piece together the fragments of information he was overhearing. He heard snippets about insurance and signatures and a vague reference to a trip. When the call finally ended, Liam retreated silently to his room, his block tower forgotten. The carefree afternoon had been shattered by the unsettling glimpse into Jessica's secret life. The all-American girl facade had slipped, revealing a calculating and secretive woman beneath. He replayed the conversation in his mind, the pieces slowly starting to fit together. The coldness he felt from her, the dismissive way she treated him, the secretive phone calls, it all pointed towards something sinister. He knew he had to tell his dad. But how could he explain his suspicions? How could he make Robert, so happy and in love, believe that his seemingly perfect fiancée was hiding something so dark? He didn't have any proof, just his gut feelings and the fragments of overheard conversations. Over the next few days, Liam became even more watchful, his young eyes constantly observing Jessica, searching for any further clues to her secret life. He noticed more hushed phone calls, more secretive glances, more moments when her mask of sweetness would slip, revealing the coldness beneath. He tried to talk to Robert again, to express his unease, but his attempts were met with gentle reassurances and dismissals. "Liam, buddy, you're just worried about things changing," Robert would say, his arm around Liam's shoulders. "Emily is a wonderful woman. You'll see. Once we're married, we'll all be a happy family." But Liam couldn't shake the feeling that the happy family Robert envisioned was a dangerous illusion built on a foundation of lies. He knew, with a growing certainty, that he had to uncover the truth, for his dad's sake, even if it meant shattering the happiness Robert had so recently found. The overheard words, "big score, easy money, arrangements," echoed in his mind, fueling his determination to protect the man he loved from the woman who might be planning to harm him. The wedding day was fast approaching, and Liam knew he was running out of time. He had to find concrete proof, something that would open his father's eyes to the truth before it was too late. The opportunity to overhear another crucial piece of Jessica's clandestine conversations presented itself a few days before the wedding. Robert was at his bachelor party, a raucous affair organized by his best friends, leaving Liam alone in the house with Jessica. She had initially suggested he spend the night at Mikey's, but Liam, feigning a slight cold, had managed to stay home, his senses on high alert. Jessica seemed relieved to have the house to herself. After a quick and perfunctory dinner with Liam, during which she mostly scrolled through her phone, she had retreated to the master bedroom, closing the door behind her. Liam, feigning sleep in his own room, waited for a while before slipping out into the quiet hallway. He noticed a faint sliver of light beneath Jessica's bedroom door and the muffled sound of her voice. He crept closer, his bare feet silent on the carpeted floor. He pressed his ear against the cool wood, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. "Tony." Jessica's voice was low and urgent, the same conspiratorial tone he had heard before. "Everything is still on track for Saturday, right?" Liam's breath hitched. "Saturday. The wedding day. Good," Jessica continued, a note of satisfaction in her voice. "Robert is completely clueless, as usual. He's off celebrating with his buddies, probably embarrassing himself with drunken stories." A short, derisive laugh followed. Liam's small fists clenched. He didn't like the way she talked about his dad, the man who was so kind and trusting. "The big insurance payout will go through without a hitch, won't it?" Jessica pressed, her voice laced with anxiety. "You finalized all the paperwork?" There was a muffled response from the other end of the line. "Excellent," Jessica replied, the anxiety in her voice replaced by a tone of avarice. "And then, our little getaway to the Bahamas will finally become a reality. I can't wait to feel the sun on my skin and forget all about this charade." The word charade hung in the air, a stark and damning description of her relationship with Robert. Liam's understanding of the situation sharpened. She wasn't marrying his dad because she loved him. It was all an act, a performance designed to deceive and manipulate. Then, Jessica's tone shifted, a note of annoyance creeping in. "The only potential problem is that little busybody, Liam. He's too smart for his own good and always snooping around. I caught him looking through my things the other day." Liam froze, his heart leaping into his throat. She knew. She knew he was suspicious. "I had to play it cool, of course," Jessica continued. "Just brushed it off like he was a curious kid. But I can tell he doesn't trust me. We need to be careful around him, especially in the next few days." A cold wave washed over Liam. He wasn't just an inconvenience, he was a potential obstacle to her plans. The thought sent a shiver of fear down his spine. "Once we're married, it'll be different," Jessica said, her voice regaining its earlier confidence. "I'll have more control. Robert will listen to me. And Liam, well, he'll just have to get used to it. He'll be sent off to some summer camp or boarding school before he knows what hit him." The casual cruelty of her words shocked Liam. The thought of being separated from his dad, sent away against his will, filled him with a sudden and fierce resolve. He couldn't let that happen. He wouldn't. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, with Jessica and Tony discussing final arrangements and reiterating their plans. Liam listened intently, his young mind trying to absorb every detail, every nuance. He heard them mention a specific date, the Monday after the wedding, for some sort of meeting related to the insurance policy. When the call finally ended, Liam slipped back to his room, his mind reeling. The pieces of the puzzle had clicked into place with chilling clarity. Jessica wasn't just after his dad's money, she was planning to get rid of him, and then send Liam away as well. Their little getaway to the Bahamas was predicated on his father's demise. He lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, his earlier fear now mixed with a burning anger. How could she be so cruel? How could she pretend to love his dad while secretly plotting to harm him? He knew he had to act, and he had to act fast. He couldn't just rely on his suspicions anymore. He needed proof, something concrete that would convince his dad of the danger he was in. But what could an 8-year-old boy do? The answer came to him in a flash of inspiration. He remembered seeing Jessica tuck a small, ornate wooden box into the back of her closet. She had always been very secretive about it, quickly closing the closet door whenever he came near. He had been curious about its contents, but had never dared to touch it. Now, he had a feeling that the box might hold the key to uncovering Jessica's secrets. The next day, while Jessica was out running errands, another hushed phone call he had overheard suggested she was actually meeting with Tony. Liam decided to take a risk. He waited until he was sure she was gone, then quietly slipped into the master bedroom. His heart pounded in his chest as he approached Jessica's closet. The door was slightly ajar, and he could see the corner of the wooden box tucked away behind a pile of sweaters. He reached out a trembling hand and carefully pulled the box out. It was heavier than he expected, made of dark, polished wood and inlaid with intricate silver designs. There was a small latch on the front, but it wasn't locked. With trembling fingers, Liam unlatched the box and slowly lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of crimson velvet, were several items. There was a thick manila envelope, a small digital voice recorder, and a stack of photographs. Liam's eyes widened as he picked up the envelope. It was labeled Insurance Policy, Robert Henderson. His hands shaking, he pulled out the contents. There were several official-looking documents, filled with legal jargon he didn't fully understand, But one thing stood out: Jessica's name was listed as the primary beneficiary. Next, he picked up the voice recorder. It was small and sleek, and a tiny red light indicated that it had been recently used. A chilling thought struck him. Could this be where Jessica recorded her phone calls with Tony? Finally, he reached for the photographs. His breath caught in his throat as he looked at the images. There was Jessica, smiling and laughing, her arms wrapped around a man who was definitely not his dad. They were in various locations: a fancy restaurant, a sunny beach, a bustling city street. In some of the pictures, they were kissing, their embraces intimate and affectionate. The man had dark hair and a confident smile, and Liam recognized him instantly as the man he had briefly seen talking to Jessica in the kitchen a few weeks ago when Robert was out of town. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with a sickening finality. The errands Jessica had been running, the hushed phone calls, the talk of insurance money and a getaway, it all made sense now. The woman his dad was planning to marry was a fraud, a liar, and possibly something even worse. Liam carefully placed the photographs back in the box, his small mind reeling from the enormity of his discovery. He had the proof he needed. Now, he just had to figure out how to show it to his dad before it was too late. The wedding was only a few days away. He had to act fast. The discovery of the wooden box and its incriminating contents fueled Liam's determination. He knew he had to gather more evidence, something undeniable that would shatter Robert's infatuation with Jessica. The fleeting glimpse of Tony in the kitchen, coupled with the photographs, suggested a deeper connection between them than Jessica was letting on. Driven by a sense of urgency, Liam decided to delve further into Jessica's belongings. He waited for another opportunity when she was out of the house, this time feigning interest in playing in the backyard to ensure Mrs. Davison, who often popped in to check on him, wouldn't suspect anything. Once he was certain he was alone, he slipped back inside and made his way to the master bedroom. Jessica's bedroom was a stark contrast to the warm, lived-in feel of the rest of the house. It was decorated in cool, minimalist tones, with expensive-looking but impersonal furniture. Her closet was meticulously organized, her clothes hung in perfect order, her shoes neatly lined up. It felt less like a shared space and more like a carefully curated display. Liam's small hands trembled slightly as he began to search. He started with the drawers, carefully sifting through her neatly folded sweaters and blouses. He found nothing particularly revealing, just expensive lingerie and designer accessories. He then moved to her bedside table. On it lay a sleek digital alarm clock, a half-read paperback thriller, and a small, silver-framed photograph, a picture of Jessica smiling radiantly, though Liam didn't recognize the background. He carefully picked it up, examining it closely. There was nothing overtly suspicious about it, but it felt like another piece of the puzzle he couldn't quite place. His gaze then fell upon a stack of papers tucked haphazardly beneath the alarm clock. He carefully pulled them out. They appeared to be credit card statements. As he flipped through them, one particular statement caught his eye. It was from a few months prior and included a charge for a hotel in Las Vegas, a lavish resort right on the famous Strip. The amount was substantial, far more than a weekend getaway for one would likely cost. A seed of suspicion took root. Why would Jessica be in Las Vegas alone? He scanned the rest of the statement and noticed several other unusual charges: expensive jewelry, high-end restaurants, and another smaller hotel bill from a different date in Las Vegas. Driven by a hunch, Liam continued to examine the other credit card statements. On a more recent bill, he found another charge for a Las Vegas hotel, this time overlapping with a weekend when Jessica had told Robert she was visiting a sick aunt out of state. His heart pounded. The pieces were falling into place. Jessica hadn't been visiting a sick aunt, she had been in Las Vegas. And the expensive hotel and restaurant charges suggested she hadn't been alone. Then, tucked in with the latest credit card statement, Liam found a small, folded piece of paper. It was a receipt from a stationery store, listing the purchase of a single greeting card and a small, plain envelope. Scribbled on the back of the receipt in hurried handwriting was a note, P.O. Box 779, Vegas, for the final confirmation. Liam's eyes widened. Las Vegas again. And a P.O. box. What final confirmation was she referring to? He carefully unfolded the greeting card. It was a generic thinking of you card, the kind one might send to a distant acquaintance. But inside, written in a different handwriting than Jessica's, were a few cryptic lines, "The arrangements are set. Everything is in place for the big day. Just need your confirmation." Beneath that, in what Liam recognized as Jessica's handwriting, was a short reply, "Confirmed. Can't wait for our little celebration after." Liam's blood ran cold. The arrangements, the big day, the celebration after, it all pointed back to the insurance policy and their planned getaway to the Bahamas. The P.O. box in Las Vegas seemed to be a crucial link in their scheme. He carefully folded the note and the receipt and tucked them into his pocket. He knew he had found something significant, something that, when combined with the photographs, would be hard for his dad to ignore. He continued his search, his small hands moving quickly but carefully through Jessica's belongings. In a drawer filled with travel documents, he found a brochure for a luxurious resort in the Bahamas, same destination Jessica had mentioned during her phone call with Tony. The brochure was well worn, suggesting she had spent a considerable amount of time looking at it, dreaming of her escape. Finally, tucked inside a travel-sized jewelry case, Liam found another photograph. This one was different from the others. It was a candid shot, taken indoors, and it showed Jessica and Tony embracing, their faces close, a look of conspiratorial intimacy in their eyes. The background looked like a hotel room, a plush armchair, heavy drapes, a glimpse of a king-sized bed. And on the bedside table, Liam could clearly see the same silver-framed photograph he had found earlier on Jessica's nightstand. The pieces of the puzzle had finally come together. Jessica and Tony were not just casually involved, they were deeply connected, partners in a deceitful plan that threatened his father's happiness and well-being. The Las Vegas trips, the P.O. box, the cryptic notes, the insurance policy, it all painted a damning picture of their elaborate scheme. Liam carefully placed the photograph back in the jewelry case and closed it. He knew he had enough. He had seen the pictures, overheard the conversations, and found the incriminating notes. Now, he just had to find the right moment to reveal everything to his dad, before he walked down the aisle and made the biggest mistake of his life. The weight of responsibility pressed down on his small shoulders, but his determination was unwavering. He had to protect his father, no matter what it took. The wedding day arrived with an almost cruel perfection. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, the late spring air was fragrant with the scent of blooming flowers, and the quaint, Gothic-style church in their peaceful suburban town looked like something straight out of a storybook. But beneath the idyllic surface, Liam's heart hammered with a frantic urgency. He moved through the morning in a daze, the festive atmosphere around him feeling alien and suffocating. The house was bustling with activity, Aunt Carol fussing over flower arrangements, Uncle Jim adjusting his tie in the hall mirror, Mrs. Davison bustling between the kitchen and the dining room, her cheerful chatter a stark contrast to the turmoil churning within Liam. Robert, oblivious to the storm brewing in his son's small heart, was radiating happiness. His smile was wider than Liam had seen it in years, his eyes sparkling with anticipation. He kept tooling Liam's hair and asking if he was excited to have Emily as his stepmother. Liam would nod mutely, the carefully concealed evidence weighing heavily in his pocket. He had tried, several times that morning, to talk to his dad, to voice the overwhelming fear and certainty that had taken root in his mind. But each attempt had been met with a gentle dismissal, a loving reassurance that everything was fine. Robert was so completely swept up in the romance of the occasion, so eager to embrace this new chapter in his life, that he seemed incapable of entertaining any doubts about Emily. As they dressed for the ceremony, the weight of Liam's secret felt almost unbearable. He fidgeted with his new suit, the crisp fabric feeling stiff and constricting. He clutched Barnaby, his worn and much-loved teddy bear, a small anchor of comfort in the swirling chaos of his emotions. In the limousine on the way to the church, the silence in the back seat was thick with unspoken tension. Robert hummed a cheerful tune, occasionally glancing back at Liam with a fond smile. Liam stared out the window, the familiar streets of their town blurring through his tear-pricked eyes. He knew this was his last chance. Once the ceremony began, it would be too late. He opened his mouth to speak several times, the words of accusation and warning caught in his throat. How could he shatter his dad's happiness like this? How could he accuse the woman his father loved of such terrible deceit? But then he would remember the hushed phone calls, the coldness in Jessica's eyes, the damning photographs, the cryptic notes, and his resolve would harden. He had to do it. He had to protect his dad, even if it meant causing him pain in the short term. The church was even more beautiful inside, sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the polished wooden pews. The air was thick with the sweet fragrance of lilies and roses, and the soft, melodic strains of the organ filled the hallowed space. As Liam walked down the aisle with his dad, his small hand swallowed in Robert's much larger one, he scanned the faces of the assembled guests. Grandma Henderson beamed at them from the front row, her eyes filled with happy tears. Aunt Carol dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, and Uncle Jim gave Robert an encouraging nod. Everyone was smiling, their faces reflecting the joy of the occasion. But Liam's gaze was drawn to the figure standing at the altar, bathed in the soft glow of the morning sun. Emily looked radiant in her white lace gown, her smile dazzling as she gazed at Robert. But as their eyes met for a fleeting instant, Liam saw something else flicker beneath the surface of that perfect smile, a hint of something cold, something calculating, a fleeting expression that sent a fresh wave of fear through him. He clutched Barnaby tighter, the worn fur a familiar comfort against his trembling fingers. He knew, with a certainty that belied his age, that he couldn't let this happen. He couldn't stand by and watch his dad make such a terrible mistake. The pastor, a kindly-faced man with a gentle demeanor, began the opening remarks, his voice resonating through the quiet church. He spoke of love and commitment, of the joining of two hearts, his words weaving a tapestry of hope and happiness. Liam's anxiety reached a fever pitch. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. He glanced at his dad, at the hopeful anticipation shining in his eyes, and then back at Emily, her serene smile unwavering. He had to do it now. Just as the pastor was about to transition into the exchange of vows, Liam's small hand slipped out of his father's grasp. He took a hesitant step forward, his face pale, his lower lip trembling. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He tried again, swallowing hard, his eyes fixed on his father. "Dad," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the soft murmur of the organ music. Robert looked down at him, a slight frown creasing his brow. "Liam. What is it, buddy? Are you okay?" Emily's perfect smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of annoyance crossing her features before she quickly masked it with a look of gentle concern. "Is something wrong, dear?" she asked, her voice a picture of sweetness. But Liam wasn't looking at Emily. His gaze was locked on his father's kind, trusting face. He had to find the courage to speak the words that had been weighing so heavily on his heart. He took another step forward, his small voice gaining a sliver of strength, enough to cut through the hushed reverence of the church. He reached out a trembling hand and gently tugged at the sleeve of Robert's suit jacket. "Dad," he said, his voice still shaky but clear enough for those in the front pews to hear. "Wait." The single word hung in the air, an unexpected and jarring interruption to the solemnity of the occasion. All eyes in the church turned towards the small boy standing in the aisle, his face a mask of fear and determination. The soft murmur of the organ faded into an abrupt silence, the expectant atmosphere replaced by a palpable tension. Robert knelt down beside his son, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. "Liam. What is it, buddy? What's wrong?" He placed a reassuring hand on Liam's shoulder. "It's okay. Just tell me." Emily stood frozen at the altar, her radiant smile completely gone, her eyes wide with a dawning alarm. A nervous tremor ran through her body, and she suddenly clenched her hands. Liam looked into his father's worried eyes, the love he felt for him giving him a surge of unexpected courage. He had to do this, for his dad's sake. "Dad," he said, his voice trembling but firm. "You can't marry her. She's not who you think she is. There are things you don't know about her. Things that aren't right." He swallowed hard, his gaze flicking towards Emily, a silent accusation in his young eyes. "She's hiding something bad." A collective gasp rippled through the assembled guests. Grandma Henderson's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Aunt Carol's carefully applied makeup seemed to falter as her jaw dropped. Uncle Jim's encouraging expression turned to one of bewildered concern. The joyous anticipation of the wedding day had been shattered, replaced by a scene of unexpected and unsettling drama. Robert stared at his son, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Liam, what are you talking about? What things? What's wrong?" He looked towards Emily, a question forming in his eyes, but she avoided his gaze, her face now pale and drawn. Liam took another deep breath, his small voice gaining strength as he continued, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I heard her on the phone, Dad. She was talking to someone, about money. About a big insurance payout. And she said you wouldn't suspect a thing." He paused, his eyes welling up with tears but his gaze remaining fixed on his father. "And I saw pictures, Dad. Pictures of her, with another man." The words hung heavy in the air, the implications undeniable. The stunned silence in the church was broken only by the soft rustling of clothes as guests shifted in their seats, their faces a mixture of shock, disbelief, and morbid fascination. The beautiful wedding ceremony had come to a screeching halt, derailed by the desperate words of an 8-year-old boy and the shocking accusations they contained. A wave of murmurs rippled through the stunned congregation, every eye fixed on the small figure of Liam standing in the aisle. Robert, his face a mask of bewilderment and a dawning concern, knelt down, placing a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "Liam, buddy," he said softly, his voice tinged with a nervous uncertainty. "What are you saying? What pictures? What other man?" He glanced quickly at Emily, who stood frozen at the altar, her face pale and her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else Robert couldn't quite decipher. "It's okay, son," Robert continued, trying to project an air of calm he didn't feel. "Maybe you had a bad dream. Or maybe you misunderstood something." He desperately wanted to believe it was just a child's overactive imagination, a misunderstanding born of anxiety about the upcoming changes in their lives. The thought of Liam's accusations being true was too painful to contemplate. But Liam shook his head vehemently, his small face set with a determination that belied his age. "No, Dad. I'm not making it up. It's true. Jessica, she's not good." He reached into the pocket of his new suit jacket and pulled out Chloe's slightly battered pink iPad, its screen displaying a gallery of images. "Chloe helped me," Liam explained, his voice trembling slightly but filled with a sense of purpose. "She's my best friend forever. I showed her the pictures I found, and she helped me take photos of them with her iPad so I could show you." He held out the iPad, his small hands shaking, towards his father. On the screen, the images were clear and undeniable, Jessica in the arms of a man who was definitely not Robert, their embraces intimate, their smiles suggesting a deep and affectionate connection. There were pictures of them laughing together in front of the dazzling lights of the Las Vegas Strip, posing playfully before the iconic "Welcome to Fabulous Las Vegas" sign, and sharing a romantic dinner at a candlelit table. Robert stared at the images on the screen, his face slowly losing its color. A look of disbelief, followed by a dawning horror, washed over him. He scrolled through the gallery, each picture a fresh stab of pain and confusion. He recognized the backdrop of the Las Vegas Strip from a travel brochure Jessica had casually left on the coffee table a few weeks ago, claiming she was researching potential vacation spots for them. His gaze then fell upon another image, a close-up shot of a handwritten note lying on top of a credit card statement. Liam pointed a trembling finger at the screen. "And that's a note I found, Dad. It talks about a P.O. box in Vegas and a final confirmation." Robert's mind reeled, trying to process the overwhelming influx of information. Las Vegas. Another man. Secret notes. It was all too much, too sudden, too devastating. He looked up at Emily, who was now ashen-faced and silent, her eyes wide with panic. "Robert. I can explain," she finally stammered, her voice barely a whisper. But the sight of the damning images on the iPad seemed to have robbed her of her usual persuasive charm. Liam wasn't finished. He swiped to another app on the iPad and pressed play. A slightly muffled but clearly audible recording filled the stunned silence of the church. It was Jessica's voice, talking in hushed tones. "Yes, Tony. Everything is still on track for Saturday, right? Good. The big insurance payout will go through without a hitch, won't it? Excellent. And then, our little getaway to the Bahamas will finally become a reality." Robert's breath hitched. He recognized the voice instantly. It was Emily's. Or rather, Jessica's. The words, the casual mention of a big insurance payout and a getaway to the Bahamas, echoed the unease Liam had been trying to convey. The recording continued, Jessica's voice laced with a chilling callousness as she spoke about Liam. "The only potential problem is that little busybody, Liam. He's too smart for his own good and always snooping around. He doesn't trust me. He'll be sent off to some summer camp or boarding school before he knows what hit him." A wave of anger, sharp and protective, surged through Robert. How could she talk about his son like that? How could she be so cold and calculating? The image of the loving, devoted woman he thought he knew shattered into a million pieces. He looked up at Emily, his eyes filled with a mixture of hurt, betrayal, and a growing fury. "Jessica," he said, his voice low and dangerous, the sweetness gone. "Who is Tony? And what is this about insurance money and a trip to the Bahamas?" Emily's carefully constructed facade finally crumbled. Tears streamed down her face as she looked from Robert to the iPad in Liam's trembling hands. Her eyes darted around the church, desperately seeking an escape, a way out of the devastating truth that had just been revealed. The pastor stood frozen at the altar, his face a picture of shock and disbelief. The wedding guests, who had been murmuring amongst themselves, fell silent again, their attention riveted on the unfolding drama. Grandma Henderson gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Aunt Carol's tears were no longer tears of joy. Uncle Jim's jaw hung slack. Tony, who had been standing awkwardly near the entrance, his initial amusement having long since faded, now looked ashen-faced. He seemed to realize that their carefully laid plans had imploded in the most public and humiliating way possible. Robert stood up, his gaze never leaving Jessica's. The pain of betrayal was etched deep in his eyes, but beneath it, a steely resolve began to form. He had been a fool, blinded by his desire for companionship and happiness. But he wouldn't be a victim. Not anymore. "I think," Robert said, his voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil within him, "we need to call the police." The words hung in the air, a stark pronouncement that brought the unfolding drama to a new and serious level. A collective gasp rippled through the stunned congregation. The fairytale wedding had officially turned into a real-life crime scene. Emily's sobs intensified, her body shaking with the weight of her exposed deceit. Tony shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting towards the exits. Liam, still clutching Barnaby, looked up at his father, his own fear beginning to subside, replaced by a sense of relief and the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had done the right thing. He had spoken the truth, no matter how difficult, and he had saved his dad from a terrible mistake. The joyous music of the organ had long since ceased, replaced by the heavy silence of shock and disbelief. The beautiful flowers adorning the altar now seemed to mock the ugliness of the deception that had been revealed. The dream of a happy new beginning had been shattered, leaving behind the bitter taste of betrayal and the unexpected courage of an 8-year-old boy and his trusty pink iPad. A torrent of tears streamed down Jessica's face as she launched into a desperate plea, her voice thick with sobs and laced with theatrical indignation. "Robert, darling, please believe me," she cried, her eyes wide with feigned hurt. "Liam is just confused. He doesn't understand the complexities of adult relationships. These pictures, they're old. Tony is just an old friend, someone I haven't seen in years." She cast a pleading look at the assembled guests, her voice rising in pitch. "You all know me. You know I love Robert. This is some kind of misunderstanding, a childish fantasy that has gotten completely out of hand." But her performance lacked its usual polish. The raw panic in her eyes betrayed her carefully crafted words. The evidence on Chloe's iPad was stark and undeniable, the dates on the photographs contradicting her claims of a long-dormant friendship. The recording of her own voice, discussing insurance payouts and a getaway with Tony, hung in the air like a damning indictment. Robert remained silent, his gaze fixed on Jessica, his expression a mixture of profound disappointment and a hardening resolve. The tears streaming down her face no longer evoked sympathy, they seemed like crocodile tears, a manipulative tactic to deflect the truth. Seeing that her initial attempts at denial were failing, Jessica's demeanor shifted abruptly. Her tearful facade crumbled, replaced by a flash of raw anger. She glared at Liam, her eyes narrowed and filled with undisguised fury. "You little brat," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Trying to ruin everything. You'll pay for this, you hear me? You and your pathetic little lies." The sudden shift in her demeanor shocked the guests. The sweet, charming Emily they thought they knew had vanished, replaced by a woman consumed by rage. Grandma Henderson gasped, clutching her chest. Several of Robert's friends stepped forward protectively, their eyes fixed on Jessica. Just then, as if on cue, a figure appeared in the doorway of the church. It was Tony, the man from the photographs, his expression a mixture of impatience and anticipation. He scanned the scene, a smug look on his face, seemingly expecting to whisk Jessica away after a successful, albeit slightly delayed, wedding. His smugness quickly evaporated as he took in the tense atmosphere, the tear-streaked face of Jessica, and the palpable anger radiating from Robert and his guests. He seemed to realize that something had gone terribly wrong. "Jessica? What's going on? Why isn't the ceremony finished?" he asked, his voice carrying through the stunned silence. Jessica's eyes widened in relief as she spotted Tony. "Tony. Thank God you're here. Tell them it's all a misunderstanding." But Tony, now fully aware of the gravity of the situation, remained rooted to the spot, his eyes darting nervously around the church. Seeing Tony's arrival, Jessica's desperation reached a fever pitch. Her carefully constructed mask of victimhood shattered completely, revealing the calculating and ruthless woman beneath. "You little snitch," she shrieked at Liam, her face contorted with rage. "You ruined everything. I should have known you were nothing but trouble." She took a step towards him, her eyes blazing with fury, but Robert stepped protectively in front of his son. "Stay away from him, Jessica," Robert said, his voice low and dangerous. The hurt in his eyes had been replaced by a cold, hard anger. As the situation threatened to escalate, Tony seemed to realize that his presence was no longer helpful. His initial plan of a quick getaway with a newly married and wealthy Jessica had clearly gone awry. Panic flickered in his eyes. Suddenly, Tony made a dash for the exit. He turned and sprinted towards the church doors, hoping to escape the unfolding chaos. But he hadn't counted on Robert's friends. Several of them, including a couple of burly men who Robert knew from his old college football team and two others who were veterans and possessed a quiet, efficient kind of resolve, reacted instantly. They moved quickly and decisively, intercepting Tony before he could reach the doors. A brief but tense struggle ensued near the entrance. Tony, fueled by desperation, tried to fight his way free, but Robert's friends were too strong and too determined. They quickly subdued him, their hands firm on his arms, effectively blocking his escape route. "Let me go!" Tony yelled, his face red with exertion and fear. "This has nothing to do with me." But his protests fell on deaf ears. The wedding guests watched in stunned silence as Tony was wrestled to the ground and held firmly by Robert's friends. Robert, having ensured Liam was safe behind him, approached Tony, his expression grim. "Oh, it has everything to do with you, Tony," he said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "You and Jessica thought you could come into my life, deceive me, and steal everything I've worked for. Well, your little plan just hit a major snag." Jessica, witnessing Tony's capture, collapsed into a chair, sobbing hysterically. Her dreams of a luxurious life in the Bahamas had evaporated, replaced by the harsh reality of her exposed deceit. The pastor, looking utterly bewildered, finally found his voice. Perhaps it would be best if everyone remained calm until the authorities arrive," he suggested weakly, his words barely audible above Jessica's sobs and Tony's muffled protests. Robert nodded grimly. He looked down at Liam, who was still clutching Barnaby, his small face pale but his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and relief. Robert reached down and squeezed his son's hand. "You did good, buddy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You were so brave." Liam managed a small, shaky smile. The fear hadn't completely gone, but the weight of his secret had lifted, replaced by the comforting presence of his father's love and gratitude. The joyous occasion had been completely and irrevocably shattered. The beautiful church, meant to be the setting for a celebration of love and commitment, had become the stage for a dramatic and painful confrontation, a testament to the destructive power of deceit and the unexpected courage of a small boy who dared to speak the truth. The arrival of the police sirens in the distance signaled the final act of this unexpected drama, the consequences of Jessica and Tony's actions about to unfold. The piercing wail of sirens grew louder, finally culminating in the arrival of two Ford Crown Victoria police cruisers, their flashing lights casting an eerie blue and red glow through the stained glass windows of the once joyful church. Two uniformed officers entered, their expressions serious as they surveyed the chaotic scene. Robert, still reeling from the shock and betrayal, explained the situation in a steady but emotionally strained voice, gesturing towards a sobbing Jessica and a subdued Tony being held by his friends. Liam stood close by, clutching Barnaby, his small face pale but his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and relief. The officers quickly took control of the situation, separating Jessica and Tony. They listened intently as Robert recounted Liam's overheard conversations, the discovery of the photographs and notes, and the subsequent confession, or rather, exposure, during the wedding ceremony. Chloe's iPad, with its damning evidence, was carefully taken as potential evidence. Jessica, her initial defiance having crumbled into despair, offered little resistance as she was handcuffed and led away, her pristine white wedding gown now a stark symbol of her shattered deception. Tony, equally subdued, was also placed in handcuffs, his earlier bravado replaced by a sullen resignation. As they were escorted out of the church, a low murmur rippled through the remaining guests, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and a sense of grim satisfaction. Robert, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over him, knelt down and pulled Liam into a tight embrace. "Oh, buddy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved me. You saved us from something terrible. I don't know what I would have done without you." Liam clung to his father, the warmth of the embrace a comforting reassurance after the terrifying ordeal. He felt a sense of relief wash over him, the heavy burden of his secret finally lifted. The aftermath of the disrupted wedding was a whirlwind of activity. The remaining guests, a mixture of concerned family and bewildered friends, offered their support and condolences. Grandma Henderson, her face pale but resolute, held Robert's hand tightly, her eyes filled with a fierce protectiveness for her grandson. Aunt Carol and Uncle Jim offered practical help, dealing with the caterers and the stunned pastor. The story of the Bridezilla scam and the heroic 8-year-old who exposed it spread through their quiet suburban town like wildfire. The local news outlets, including the CNN affiliate and the local newspaper, picked up the story with fervor, the dramatic details of the interrupted wedding and the young boy's bravery capturing the public's attention. Headlines screamed about the wedding day betrayal and the heroic son who unmasked his father's deceitful fiancée. Robert and Liam found themselves at the center of a media storm, their quiet lives suddenly thrust into the spotlight. While Robert shielded Liam as much as possible from the intrusive attention, the outpouring of support from their community was overwhelming. Neighbors, some of whom they barely knew, stopped by with casseroles, flowers, and heartfelt messages of encouragement. Children Liam's age drew him pictures and offered words of admiration for his courage. The local bakery even delivered a special cake with the words "Liam the Hero" written in frosting. The sense of community solidarity was palpable, a warm embrace that helped to cushion the blow of Robert's painful experience. The investigation moved quickly. The evidence Liam had gathered, along with the subsequent police interviews, painted a clear picture of Jessica and Tony's elaborate scheme. Their long-standing relationship, their financial troubles, and their calculated plan to defraud Robert were all brought to light. The P.O. box in Las Vegas yielded further incriminating evidence, including correspondence related to the insurance policy and their travel arrangements. Robert, with the support of his family and friends, began the difficult process of picking up the pieces. The emotional scars of the betrayal ran deep, but the unwavering love and support of Liam and his community provided a much-needed balm. He spent hours talking to Liam, explaining the situation in age-appropriate terms, reassuring him that he had done the right thing and that their bond was stronger than ever. The house, once filled with the anticipation of a new beginning, now felt strangely empty and tainted. Robert decided to make some changes, redecorating and rearranging furniture to erase the lingering presence of Jessica. Liam helped him, and the process became a form of healing, a way for them to reclaim their home and their lives. As the weeks passed, the media attention gradually subsided, but the impact of the Bridezilla scam lingered in their town. People still whispered about it, and Liam became something of a local celebrity, albeit one who preferred the quiet normalcy of playing with his Legos and hanging out with Chloe. Robert, though still bearing the emotional wounds of the betrayal, found solace in the unwavering love of his son and the strong support of his community. He started attending a support group for people who had experienced similar betrayals, finding comfort in sharing his experiences and hearing the stories of others. Life slowly began to return to a semblance of normalcy for Robert and Liam. The pain of the past hadn't vanished entirely, but it had begun to dull, replaced by a renewed appreciation for the simple joys of their life together. The bond between father and son, forged in the crucible of deception and courage, was stronger than ever before. They had faced a dark and frightening ordeal, and they had emerged from it together, their love and trust for each other unbroken. The Bridezilla scam had brought pain and heartache, but it had also revealed the extraordinary bravery of a young boy and the enduring power of familial love in the face of adversity. Months passed, and the initial shock of the Bridezilla scam gradually faded, though its impact on Robert and Liam remained profound. Robert, seeking a change of scenery and a chance to reconnect with Liam away from the lingering memories of Jessica in their home, planned a camping trip to Yellowstone National Park. He remembered taking Sarah there years ago, and the vast, awe-inspiring landscapes felt like the perfect place for healing and reflection. Liam was thrilled at the idea. He loved the outdoors, the smell of pine needles, the crackling warmth of a campfire, and the sense of adventure that came with exploring new places. Barnaby, of course, came along for the ride, nestled snugly in Liam's backpack. Their journey to Yellowstone was filled with scenic drives, playful banter, and a comfortable silence that spoke volumes about the strengthening bond between father and son. They marveled at the geysers erupting towards the sky, hiked through fragrant pine forests, and watched in awe as bison grazed peacefully in the vast meadows. Evenings were spent by the crackling campfire, the star-studded sky a breathtaking canopy above them. They roasted marshmallows, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames, and Robert shared stories of his own childhood camping adventures. Liam, in turn, recounted his favorite moments from their hikes, his voice filled with a newfound confidence. One evening, as the embers glowed softly and the night air grew crisp, another family set up camp nearby. They introduced themselves as the Johnsons, Mark and Lisa, and their 2 children, a teenage daughter named Emily, a coincidence that made Robert flinch slightly, though Liam didn't notice, and a younger son, about Liam's age, named Kevin. As the children played a game of tag around the campsite, Robert and Mark struck up a conversation. They talked about the beauty of Yellowstone, their favorite hiking trails, and the challenges of raising children. Eventually, the conversation took a more personal turn. Mark, noticing a certain sadness that still lingered in Robert's eyes, asked gently, "You seem like you've been through a lot lately, Robert." Robert hesitated for a moment, then decided to share his story. He spoke candidly about meeting Jessica, the whirlwind romance, and the devastating betrayal that had unfolded on what was supposed to be his wedding day. He recounted Liam's bravery and the shocking evidence they had uncovered. Mark listened intently, his expression growing increasingly sympathetic. When Robert finished, Mark let out a long sigh. "You wouldn't believe it," he said, shaking his head slowly, "but something very similar happened to Lisa and me a couple of years ago." Lisa joined the conversation, her expression somber. She explained how they had been targeted by a con artist who had befriended them, gained their trust, and then systematically defrauded them out of a significant amount of money. The details of their experience bore an uncanny resemblance to Robert's ordeal, the manipulation and the feeling of profound betrayal all too familiar. As they shared their stories, a sense of camaraderie and understanding blossomed between the 2 families. They talked about the emotional toll of being deceived, the difficulty of trusting again, and the long and arduous process of healing. Liam and Kevin, who had been playing nearby, wandered over and listened with wide eyes as their parents shared their experiences. For Liam, hearing that another family had gone through something similar, that his dad wasn't alone in his pain, was surprisingly comforting. That evening, around the campfire, the 2 families found solace in each other's company. They shared tips on coping mechanisms, recommended books and resources that had helped them, and offered each other unwavering support. There were tears, but there was also laughter as they recounted some of the more absurd details of their respective ordeals. For Robert, talking to Mark and Lisa was incredibly cathartic. It was the first time he had spoken so openly and honestly with someone who truly understood the depth of his pain and the lingering feelings of vulnerability. He realized that he wasn't alone in his experience, that others had survived similar betrayals and had found a way to move forward. Liam, too, felt a sense of connection with Kevin. They talked about their favorite video games and superheroes, finding common ground despite the difficult circumstances that had brought their families together. As the night drew to a close and the embers of the campfire began to fade, the 2 families exchanged contact information, promising to stay in touch. There was a shared understanding between them, a bond forged in the crucible of similar pain and a mutual hope for a brighter future. That night, as Robert and Liam lay in their tent, the silence between them felt different than before. It was a comfortable silence, filled with a shared understanding and a renewed sense of hope. The encounter with the Johnsons had been a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always the possibility of finding connection and support. The vast wilderness of Yellowstone, with its majestic beauty and quiet strength, seemed to mirror the resilience of the human spirit, the ability to heal and to find light even after experiencing profound darkness. Robert knew that the road to complete healing was still long, but for the first time since the wedding day that wasn't, he felt a genuine sense of optimism for the future, a future he would face alongside his brave and loving son. 6 months had passed since the dramatic events of the interrupted wedding. Life in the Henderson household had settled into a new rhythm, one characterized by a quiet normalcy and a deeper, more resilient bond between Robert and Liam. The emotional wounds were still there, faint scars that served as a reminder of the past, but the acute pain had subsided, replaced by a sense of gratitude for what they had overcome. Robert had focused on rebuilding his life, throwing himself back into his work at Tech Solutions and cherishing his time with Liam. They had established new routines, movie nights on Fridays, weekend hikes in the local nature preserve, and regular check-ins where Liam felt comfortable sharing his thoughts and feelings. The shadow of Jessica still lingered, but it no longer dominated their lives. One crisp autumn afternoon, Robert received a certified letter from the attorney who had handled Jessica's case. A sense of unease settled in his stomach as he recognized the return address. He waited until Liam was occupied with his homework before opening it. The letter contained somber news. Jessica Carter, or rather, Jessica Miller, had died by suicide in prison. Enclosed with the legal documents was a sealed envelope addressed to Robert and Liam. Robert's hand trembled slightly as he opened it. The letter was written in a shaky, uneven hand. It was a confession of sorts, a final attempt by Jessica to explain her actions and express a belated remorse. She wrote about a difficult and impoverished childhood, marked by instability and a constant struggle for survival. She detailed a series of bad decisions and mounting financial pressures that had led her down a desperate path. She admitted that her relationship with Tony had been driven by mutual desperation and a misguided belief that they could escape their circumstances through the insurance money. She acknowledged the pain and betrayal she had inflicted on Robert, stating that, despite her intentions, a part of her had genuinely come to care for him, a fact that only amplified her guilt in the end. Towards the end of the letter, her handwriting became even more unsteady as she addressed Liam directly. She wrote of having underestimated his intelligence and perceptiveness, admitting that he had seen through her charade long before anyone else. She acknowledged his bravery in speaking out, recognizing that his actions, though painful at the time, had ultimately saved his father from a terrible fate. She called him an exceptionally brave and perceptive young man and expressed a sorrowful regret for the fear and confusion she had caused him. Robert read the letter with a heavy heart. While it offered a glimpse into the circumstances that had shaped Jessica's choices, it didn't excuse her actions. The pain of her betrayal was still raw, but there was also a sense of closure in reading her final words. He felt a strange mix of pity and lingering anger, a complex swirl of emotions that left him feeling drained. Later that evening, after Liam had finished his homework, Robert sat down with him. He explained, in simple terms, that Jessica had passed away. He then read him the portion of her letter that was addressed to him. Liam listened quietly, his brow furrowed in thought. When Robert finished reading, he was silent for a long moment. Then, he looked up at his father, his young eyes filled with a wisdom beyond his years. "She was really sad, wasn't she, Dad?" Liam asked softly. Robert nodded, pulling Liam into a comforting hug. "Yes, buddy. It sounds like she was." They sat together in silence for a while, the weight of Jessica's tragic end settling in the quiet of their living room. It was a somber reminder of the far-reaching consequences of deception and the fragility of human lives. The letter didn't erase the pain or the betrayal, but it did offer a sense of finality. Jessica and Tony's scheme had been exposed, their plans thwarted, and now, Jessica's story had reached its tragic conclusion. For Robert and Liam, it was time to fully close that chapter of their lives and focus on the future they were building together, a future grounded in honesty, love, and an unbreakable bond. The unexpected journey they had navigated had left them scarred but also stronger, their appreciation for each other and for the simple joys of life deepened by the trials they had overcome. Life moved forward for Robert and Liam, the passage of time weaving a tapestry of healing and renewed joy into the fabric of their days. Their home, once shadowed by deceit, now echoed with laughter and the comfortable rhythm of their shared life. The bond between father and son, forged in the crucible of betrayal and Liam's extraordinary courage, had become an unshakable foundation of trust and love. Robert, forever grateful for Liam's perceptiveness and bravery, nurtured his son's inquisitive mind and strong moral compass. He encouraged Liam's natural curiosity, patiently answering his endless questions and fostering his keen sense of observation. They spent countless hours together, building Lego masterpieces that rivaled Liam's earlier Millennium Falcon attempt, exploring local hiking trails, and engaging in spirited games of catch in their backyard. Liam, in turn, blossomed. The anxiety that had clouded his young face during Jessica's presence gradually faded, replaced by a bright confidence. He excelled in school, his sharp mind absorbing information like a sponge. And he indeed became something of a neighborhood kid detective. Armed with his keen eyesight and an uncanny ability to notice small details, he often helped his friends find lost toys, decipher cryptic clues in their imaginative games, and even successfully located Mrs. Davison's missing cat, Mittens, earning him the honorary title of Sherlock Liam among his peers. His burgeoning interest in solving mysteries led him to join the local Boy Scouts troop. He thrived in the structured environment, embracing the challenges of learning new skills, from knot tying to wilderness survival. The Scout Law, with its emphasis on trustworthiness, loyalty, and helpfulness, resonated deeply with his own innate sense of right and wrong. Robert proudly watched Liam participate in campouts and community service projects, marveling at the young man his son was becoming. Robert, too, found his footing again. He continued to find support in his friendships and his connection with the Johnson family, whom they stayed in touch with, sharing occasional emails and phone calls. He even cautiously began to consider the possibility of dating again, though he approached the prospect with a newfound sense of discernment and a healthy dose of caution. But his primary focus remained Liam. He cherished their time together, recognizing the preciousness of their bond. He never forgot the courage Liam had shown, the unwavering love that had compelled him to speak the truth on that fateful day. He often told Liam how proud he was of him, not just for uncovering Jessica's deception, but for his bravery and his kind heart. One sunny Saturday afternoon, Robert and Liam headed to the local minor league baseball stadium to catch a game. It was a simple outing, something they had often done before, but this time, there was a deeper sense of appreciation for the normalcy of it all. As they sat in the stands, enjoying hot dogs and cheering on the home team, Robert watched Liam's face light up with excitement. In that moment, surrounded by the familiar sounds of the ballpark and the warmth of the afternoon sun, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Life wasn't always easy. The memory of Jessica's betrayal would likely always linger in the background. But they had faced their challenges together, and they had emerged stronger and closer than ever. They had learned valuable lessons about trust, vigilance, and the enduring power of family. And as Liam turned to him, a wide, happy grin on his face, asking for another bag of peanuts, Robert knew that their future, though different from the one he had once imagined, was filled with love, laughter, and the unbreakable bond between a father and his exceptionally brave and perceptive son. The Bridezilla scam had been a painful chapter, but it had ultimately paved the way for a deeper, more authentic happiness, built on the solid foundation of their unwavering love for each other.